Good morning and welcome to today's webinar on player safety. My name is Kurt Gibson. I'm the Associate Executive Director here at the IHSA, and for a number of years I had the opportunity to work with our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. You'll hear a little bit more about that in our presentation today, but we are going to focus on player safety and risk management, and this is one in a series of webinars that our staff has conducted this year, primarily focusing these on a little as a follow-up to the new administrator workshop that we held earlier this year. And I see a couple of our attendees today were able to attend that meeting, so we hope your year has gone well. I would, in terms of a couple of housekeeping reminders, let you know that down in the chat area, which you should be able to find over on the left-hand side of your screen, if you have any questions at all, whether it's about player safety or some other topic during the webinar, go ahead and type those in there and we'll respond to those as we go through things today. I would also just say in general, if you ever have any questions about anything regarding the school year, something that could be IHSA related, or maybe something that's not even IHSA related, but you just have a question about, there's a number of resources here at IHSA in terms of our administrative staff, and we'd be happy to help you whenever we can. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump in and talk a little bit about player safety. Player safety really begins with the appropriate playing rules for all high school student athletes, and the National Federation of State High School Associations, the NFHS, and you'll hear them referred to a few times today during our presentation. They oversee the process, I should say, for writing rules that govern high school sports here in Illinois. And you see some examples of the rule books, various rule books here on this slide. The NFHS writes the playing rules for 17 sports for boys and girls and publishes nearly 30 rules publications annually. We send your school copies of those rule books, and we hope that they're a good reference for you and for your coaches. Hopefully those are kept in a place, if they're not given directly to coaches, where they can access them. And if you have coaches, or even if you want to purchase a second or additional copies of those, you can always reach out to our office and we'll be happy to help you with that. Another important part of the rules writing process for high school sports here in Illinois, really the premise, I guess I should say, for writing rules wraps itself around this idea that the rules are going to be created to minimize the risk of injury to participants. And the National Federation of State High School Associations, the NFHS, has commissioned since 2005 a national high school sports-related injury surveillance study. So what that means is, since 2005, the NFHS has worked with schools around the country, schools that have athletic trainers, who have inputted into this national database the injuries that have occurred to student athletes at their school by sport, by area of injury, by the kind of play or practice that was going on when the injury occurred, to how much time it took the athlete to recover fully. And so the NFHS uses this study and the results from this study on an annual basis with its rules writing committees to determine if new rules need to be implemented or how successful recent rule efforts have been in terms of reducing the risk to student athletes in each sport. Now, I'm not sure we've done enough to promote the fact that that report's out there and is a vital piece to the rules writing process. As I mentioned, both our office and the National Federation have what we call Sports Medicine Advisory Committees, or SMACs, and whose chief and primary function is to offer guidance on sports and health-related matters. So while the NFHS SMAC will have some input and in the rules writing process, the IHSA's group, the IHSA SMAC, and you see a visual of the members of that committee over there on the right-hand side of the screen. Their charge has been primarily education although we're going to see here in a minute some of the initiatives that they've undertaken along with the membership over the last decade or so to reduce risk beyond just the rules writing process here in Illinois. I'd also, as I would point out to any group that we talk to, on these advisory committee pages, down at the bottom, and you see, I know it's a small print there, but on any advisory committee page, at the bottom of those pages, there's a heading for recent committee meeting minutes. And below that heading are all the minutes from the last handful of years of meetings from those various committees. So if you're ever wondering how things have gotten in a particular sport to the point they are, a review of those meeting minutes is always helpful. So in the next few slides, we'll begin to look at some of these changes that have been implemented through the work of the SMAC and or the membership at large. And then once we've done that, the remainder of the presentation, we'll look ahead at some new initiatives that are being considered by the IHSA Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. And then we'll close our presentation today with some really clear tips that you can implement at your school to help and reduce the threat of injury to participants. The first thing we want to mention, though, is this concept of a pregame huddle, and this is a really important initiative that has come out of SMAC probably 2 years ago, and the whole idea behind what we're calling the pregame huddle. This is a sports medicine best practice. What we want people to do prior to games being played, and we suggest that it occur during the coaches and captains meeting, but it's not a requirement that it happens during that time frame. But at some point prior to a game beginning, the main participants for that contest should get together and have a real quick meeting about some sports medicine area topics, just so that everybody's on the same page in the event something were to occur during that game. We think that meeting should be run by either the school's athletic trainer or, and if they don't have one, an administrator. If an administrator is not able to conduct the meeting, then the coach can certainly do that. But what you see down here at the very bottom of this slide are just some real quick topics that both teams should discuss with the officials before play begins. Schools should be identifying to the officials whether or not they have someone that is school approved to assess athletes removed from a game with a head injury. And the state law requires that those folks, and the IHSA protocols would require that the only people who can assess athletes for concussion who've been removed from a game for a possible concussion are either physicians licensed to practice medicine in all its branches in Illinois. So that means an MD or a DO or a certified athletic trainer. So schools need to make sure that their coaches know who the only people are that can assess one of their athletes who's taken out of a game with a head injury and determine, okay, that person did not have a concussion, so he or she can return to the game. And that's something, that idea of who can do that for our school needs to be talked about before the contest begins. That way the officials know. So if the officials know that school A doesn't have someone on site, then if an athlete from team A is removed from the game with a head injury, then the officials will know that player will not be returning. If team B has a trainer, for example, on site, then the officials would know if we send a player out from team B with a possible concussion and the trainer evaluates them, assesses the person and says, yep, there was no concussion here, then the officials will know if the coach wants to return that player to the game, he or she can do so. But it's important in that pregame huddle that's talked about. We think it's also important during the pregame huddle that the participants, or at least the host, give the officials and the opponents a real quick overview on what any emergency action plans might be that would have any impact on that game. So in the event of a player who maybe suffers a catastrophic injury, maybe a quick, hey, if we've got to stop the game for something really serious, we need you to go back to your benches. We're going to bring in the, if we have to call an ambulance, they're going to bring the stretcher in through this door. Or if it's in an outdoor event, the gate over here on the northeast corner is where the ambulance will come in. So we need you to clear your athletes, or we need you to go to the locker room, whatever it might be. You want to have that's also part of this pregame huddle that really shouldn't take more than a minute or two. It should never delay the start of the contest. And while I said earlier, we think it's best done in that pregame coaches and captains conference, it doesn't have to be. If you want to get the people, the particular people that you need to talk to together in the hallway, out on the field before the game, wherever, when the opponent arrives coming off the bus, the where you do it is less important than the getting it done. But we really think this needs to be a greater point of emphasis within our schools and with our officials. So now let's just look quickly at some of the initiatives that have been taken over the last decade regarding safety, player safety, and risk management. And these are important things in case you get questions from coaches, or if you get questions from people in your community, that you can share with those folks. I think sometimes people even are, the average fan may not have an awareness of all the things that are being done behind the scenes. And so these are good talking points if you get in a spot with people to share. But as you can see, since the concussion rule, let's say, that was written by the NFHS came into play with the 2010-2011 school year, IHSA has required game officials, contest officials, to submit a special report anytime they send a player out of the game with a possible head injury. So the officials submit a special report, gives the details of what happened. It includes whether or not the player returned. And since that 2010-11 rule implementation, our office has received over 3,000 reports. And what we've seen over time is a general increase on a yearly basis in the overall number of reports that officials are submitting. And we think that's really important because it tells us, one, that officials are becoming more comfortable with their role in this process. The officials are not making a medical diagnosis when they send a player out with a head injury. They're just noticing something doesn't seem right. And so we have told our officials, be conservative. If you have even the slightest inkling that something could be wrong with that player, get them out of the game. There's a path for the player back in, and that's how the process should work. We mentioned over 3,000 reports have come in since the 2010-11 school year, and of those, nearly 2,500 athletes have not returned. So about 20% of the athletes in that time frame, when they've been removed from a game with a head injury, have been able to return, and we think that's great. That's the process working. Moving on, the preseason acclimatization policy for football was modified in 2013, and the association began creating, practice limits during that acclimatization period for football teams. The membership instituted new summer contact rules for football in 2014, which really prevent folks from going full pads in the summer. The membership has instituted in-season contact protocols for football since 2015. We created a heat management policy that monitors heat situations in all IHSA postseason events, and that's been in play since 2016. So when the heat index reaches a certain point, there could be state series competitions that have delays brought in, or rest periods and water periods. We've also developed concussion education for coaches and licensed officials. And as you can see here on bullet point 6, Since we're in the second cycle of that training now, and to date, over 70,000 individuals have completed the program. And this is something that at a school level you should be checking certainly yearly, if not during a school year. All of your athletic coaches, whether they are your head coach or an unpaid volunteer, must complete concussion education, concussion training before they can begin coaching a particular sport. IHSA has developed a free program that's available through the school center. There are also some other concussion education providers that are listed on the IHSA Sports Medicine page. Whether you use one of those providers or you use the IHSA's program, all your coaches need to complete concussion training, concussion education before they begin coaching. And you can monitor that in the school center as well. So if you're not the person responsible for that at your school, we'd strongly encourage you to identify someone, likely your athletic director, to make sure your coaches have done that. You're exposing yourself to tremendous amounts of liability if you have coaches working with student athletes who have not been trained through one of the approved programs. And that sort of then leads into point 7. The IHSA has provided a number of resources concerning concussion oversight teams, emergency action planning, and returning to play and returning to learn best practices. And if you are ever in need of those resources and can't find them on our website, please contact our office. Stacy Lambert oversees sports medicine our sports medicine advisory committee. Now, she would be able to help you, but any administrator will help you and can help you find those resources. The association has also developed a mechanism in our school center to allow all schools to report concussions to our office. Our office, through a state law, is now required on a yearly basis to submit concussion data to the General Assembly. Schools are able to help us in that process by going into the school center, and we provide information. We contact your athletic trainers if you use one on a monthly basis to let them know as a reminder where they can go to submit that data. But that's something that we've done in the last handful of years. And then our newest initiative that'll go into play next year is there will be weekly player limitations in football beginning this upcoming season, the 2019 season, in the fall of 2019. And beginning next season, as you see here on this slide, players will be limited to playing in 2 games per week, and one play equals playing in a game. They cannot play on back-to-back days unless there's one real minor carve-out that has to do with if the first game, let's say somebody's going to play on a Friday, and that game has to be suspended because of weather or some other reason. A player who played in that game and the game was going to be continued from the point of interruption the next day on Saturday, the player could do that. The player who played on Friday could continue in the game when it's resumed on Saturday, but that's the only exception for players playing on back-to-back days. They're limited to 2 games per week. They can't play on back-to-back days, and they're restricted from live contact, as you see here on this slide, at practice the day following a game in which the student played. So if a player plays a freshman game, let's say on a Monday, then for their Tuesday practice, those players could not be involved in live contact. They could do drills, they could do rap, but they couldn't be involved in live contact. Those are just some of the things that the association has looked at and implemented over the last decade, all aimed to try and increase safety for the players and reducing the school's risk in the event an injury does occur, because we know that there are inherent risks when students do choose to play athletics at their high school. And as you see here, we're continued and will continue to be committed to trying to do everything we can to minimize the risk for their participation. And so as we think ahead, one of the items that the IHSA's SMAC is working on right now is an acclimatization plan for all fall sports. We talked earlier how in the fall, football is the only sport that has an acclimatization program attached to it. So before a student can play in a high school football game, they have to get in a minimum number of practices, and it's spelled out for football how those practices can occur. But that's the only sport where we have an acclimatization program. And for a number of years, the SMAC has worked on what an acclimatization plan could look like for students who run cross country, play volleyball, play soccer, all the other fall sports. Those athletes are also susceptible to the same kinds of rigors that football players are, particularly when we begin things in the fall. There's added heat. In some sports, there's added equipment. And it's important that we allow students to, get their bodies in not only in shape, but in the kind of condition that will allow them to safely participate in those sports. And for too long, those sports have been neglected in terms of acclimatization. So the SMAC, the IHSA SMAC, has worked on a proposal. They're putting the finishing touches on that. And as you see here, it's possible that they're going to be making a presentation to the board of directors later this school year with what an acclimatization plan would look like for other fall sports. Certainly, if that plays out, and if the board of directors approves that, and if the board were to approve it for the upcoming fall, the fall of 2019, then our office will be in contact with schools, letting them know exactly what that acclimatization plan looks like, how it needs to be implemented. There will be resources made available on our website. But we wanted to mention that to you because we think that's a very good likelihood that this acclimatization program for other sports is going to occur. Many of you will recall that earlier in this school year, when the membership was voting on new bylaw proposals, there was a series of proposals that moved all fall sport beginning dates now to the same date, Monday, that Monday in the fall, Monday of week. If you'll give me just a second here. All fall sports now will begin on Monday of week 6. And the reason behind the shifting of all those other sports besides football and golf, which were already able to begin on that Monday of week 6, was to allow for this acclimatization plan to come in as well. So it's expected that that's going to be occurring. We're just not sure whether it'll be the fall of 2019 or possibly the fall of 2020. Certainly more to come on that, though. But we wanted to make sure you were aware of that. I've got a message here from one of today's attendees asking, would golf be included in the acclimatization? I don't believe golf is included in the acclimatization. Studies, there aren't studies that have shown that players are susceptible to acclimatization concerns or injuries like they are in other sports. Golf, I'm not trying to say golfers aren't athletes. The physical taxing of the body isn't such that the data would tell us golf needs to be included in an acclimatization plan. So I don't believe that it's a part of what the SMAC has been looking at. And then finally, just as we close here, so what are some things your school can do? We've sort of gone over what's happened over the last decade and whatnot. But thinking ahead and thinking about you as a school leader, here are some things that we think are really critical. First, there's nothing that you could do that would be more important than to insist that your coaches teach players to play within the playing rules of the sport. That sounds pretty basic and that sounds pretty commonsensical to people, but there are places where, and where maybe coaches want to stray from that to gain an advantage, and we just had to emphasize the importance of playing within the rules. Second, you need to insist that your coaches and your athletic administrators monitor the equipment that your players are wearing. Make sure if equipment needs to be approved by sport manufacturers or sport equipment testers like NAW, that all your equipment is safe, up to code, no cracks, no breaks. That's just, again, something that sounds pretty easy to do and has a lot of common sense to it, but it's also the kind of thing, if you're not attentive to, that it can get away from you real quick. Third, it's critical that your school's concussion protocols are clearly explained to everyone, your players, your coaches, your parents, your teaching staffs. Everybody is still learning so much more about concussion on a daily basis, and we know more now than we did even 5 years ago. But a lot of the questions that come into our office from folks are, can we let this player back now? Can we, do we have to have him looked at by a doctor? And really, all of the concussion protocols begin at the school level. They begin with your concussion oversight team. They're the group charged with determining how things are going to play out when an athlete is removed. And it begins at the moment somebody's removed from a game with a possible head injury. It's important that everybody knows from that point what needs to occur before the athlete can begin playing in sports again. And it's critical that your coaches know, because your coaches, if they're not in the loop, so to speak, they could unknowingly allow a player back into a contest when your protocols would say he or she should not be allowed to re-enter. And that, again, exposes you to unnecessary liability. So it's critical that there's this constant communication about, here's how we handle it when somebody's sent out of a game with a head injury. Fourth, make sure your school has in place a procedure to ensure that all your student athletes' physicals are current. There are no exceptions to bylaw 2.150. It's probably longer than I recall, but a handful of years ago, the membership changed that physical exam, that pre-participation exam bylaw, to say a physical was only current for 365 days, in other words, 12 months, to 395 days, adding another month to the period of time that a physical exam would be considered valid. And the membership did that to help families out who maybe couldn't get a second physical covered by insurance in a calendar year. That's fine, but just be monitoring those, because if, for example, an athlete has a physical that expires with 2 weeks to go and they're, maybe the only season they play, then they're done playing at that point. There's no provision in the bylaws to allow somebody to just finish the season, even though their physical expired during that season. So somebody's got to be monitoring those at all times. And then finally, make sure your school's emergency action plan is reviewed annually. That's part of the law, the Youth Sports Concussion Safety Act. And again, that needs to be communicated clearly to your staff. They need to know, not only your teachers and coaches, but also your players need to know, here's what we do if we've got a serious or catastrophic or emergency kind of situation. And while the law doesn't require this, you can earn bonus points for your school if you have your teams practice its implementation each season. And we really do suggest that, your soccer team, for example, someday at practice, have your soccer coach, conduct sort of a drill. Here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to pretend that, somebody went up for a header, hit the corner of the post, and fell to the ground and is convulsing with a serious injury. What are we going to do? And so people should have roles like, a couple of players are going to go open the gates for the ambulance to come in. Some other people are going to go and call 911. Another person or two needs to go and grab the AED and wherever it might be. But practicing those plans is not required by the law, but it's certainly a best practice. And, it's something that wouldn't take so much time that a team is not going to be able to get everything else done that they need to do on a given day. So those are just some things your school can be doing when we think about player safety and minimizing the risk to participants. And those are some things that, some of that information are maybe items you were unaware of in terms of how they came to be, or you were even unaware that IHSA had implemented or instituted some of these items. So we thought it would be a good time to just review what's been done, what you can do as a school, because we all share in the same belief that we want the playing experience for our student athletes to be an enjoyable one, and one way it's enjoyable is to make it safe. So with that, I'm going to stay. That concludes today's webinar. I'll stay online if you have any other questions. Like we've done with other webinars, this is being recorded, and we will post it online on our website. Hopefully you're familiar with ihsa.org. All of our webinars, once we archive them, when you get on any of our pages, if you look across the top in those drop-down menus, go to the heading for resources, a drop-down menu appears. If you click on video, you'll then be taken to a page where we've started to stockpile a variety of education, mostly educational-based videos that have come out of our office over the last handful of years. And this video, or this webinar, I should say, will be listed under educational presentations as well. So look for that there. You review it as often as you need to. Share it with your coaches. Share it with your parents. If you have any questions about anything, as I mentioned, that you heard today or that you see in the webinars posting, please let us know. We hope the year has gone well and continues to go well. It looks like next month's webinar will be on sportsmanship, which is also a really important and hot button topic within the membership. So you'll want to catch that. It looks like March 6th will be our date for that webinar. More information will be coming once we get to the end of this month and the first part of next month, but March 6th, webinar on sportsmanship. Not seeing any other questions, I think I'm going to say thanks again for attending today. Feel free to reach out to any of us here at the IHSA if you have any other questions, and great luck to you and your school during the rest of this 2018-2019 school year. Thanks again. Have a great day.